Welcome to the podcast. So this podcast is going to start off initially, which is just the audio with a video that's on the YouTube channel, plausible question mark. And then it's going to move on to the extra bonus material, which should be around the 29-minute mark. That will consist of Amy Eskridge's presentation that she gave. Then I'll do a little bit of extra analysis on that, some interesting points to pick up. I was going to read out the emails and the text messages sent from Amy McCasland to her correspondence, but I feel the podcast kind of addresses a certain plausibility on the outcome of this case. And you'll see, and maybe you agree, maybe not, but maybe leave something in the comments if you feel I've missed anything. That would be quite interesting to know. I think going forward, there are a couple of cases that I want to work on before I delve into the other ones of these. So there's certain things which I'm going to go off piste on, which is a UFO sighting from 2021 in Syria, which is really interesting, and the maths and the physics kind of is quite interesting on that. And there's also a research paper as well that was recently published, which I'm going to look into, which seems very interesting again. But there are still cases in the McCasland disappearance pattern that are of interest. You know, Stephen Garcia, that's quite interesting. You got Matthew James Sullivan, which is a new one, which has just come on my radar. I mean, that's very interesting. So yeah, we'll delve back into this, but maybe in a few episodes' time. Thank you. Like and subscribe, and please comment if you've got any ideas or anything you want me to cover, or even if there's something you feel I've missed. But yeah, enjoy the podcast. Like and subscribe and comment. Thanks for listening. Okay, so welcome. In this episode, we're looking into Amy Eskridge. Now, this one's a bit tricky because it's quite popular at the moment, and there's a lot of data that's flooded the internet. And whilst plenty of data is generally good, it does make it slightly trickier to filter out the noise and find the reliable sources and the true data therein. So just to note as well, the podcast of this subject will be out Monday or Tuesday, and I'll have plenty more information in it, especially from the next episode as well, which should hopefully be out Sunday. The next episode's on the Institute of Exotic Sciences, which is the institute that Amy found with her father, Richard. Okay, there's loads of interesting information in that. And it kind of relates to the ongoing topic in general as well. But I don't include the extra information in the videos just because I like to make them a little bit more digestible. Okay, so like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate all the comments. It takes me a while to respond to them, but I do read every comment, and I love the sense of community that's growing here. It's brilliant. Okay, first of all, I'm sure we all wish this. Our thoughts with Amy's family and her friends, and it must be incredibly hard, especially given this happened a while ago, to have it all resurfacing. So it's bear this in mind, and with all these cases, there's real people, real families and friends at the other end of this that are likely going to be upset, and it's going to again revive all these emotions, everything like that. So apologies to them, and any ponderings and speculations here are not meant with any like malice or callousness. The case thus far, and I'm sure we're all aware, Amy passed away on the 11th of June 2022. From a self-inflicted gunshot wound as ruled by the Madison County Coroner's Office and local law enforcement. As a very important note, her father has also confirmed this is the cause of death and agreed with the self-unalival outcome of that. Now, there were rumours there was no autopsy, but again, I can't find anything in either side of this. There was no release about an autopsy, but that doesn't mean that one was carried out. It just means it's not public, which in all honesty, you can understand from the perspective of her loved ones. So this part isn't really suspicious. Further to this, people have noted lack of forensic evidence, such as no report on the bullet type, trajectory, that kind of thing surrounding her death. But this isn't actually irregular in self-unalival cases. That is something that's more widely done in intentional and non-self-unalivals. Sorry, I'm trying to rephrase this for YouTube algorithms that's YouTube friendly, and it's a bit tricky at times, so apologies for that. In situations of self-unalival, it's generally at the family's approval due to privacy laws that this is released publicly. So again, that's what I mean. It's not really suspicious on for that factor. Now, the suspicion really comes into play when we look at the lead up of her unalival and her research topic of interest. So, on the lead up, let's go back to 2018. Eskridge co-founded the Institute for Exotic Science in Huntsville, Alabama, with her father, Richard Eskridge. Her father, and this is of note, is a former NASA engineer who worked at the George C. Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Now, Huntsville is also known as Rocket City due to its pivotal role in developing the rockets that powered the US space program. So, Richard's specialization is in plasma physics, fusion technology, and novel propulsion systems. So, exactly the area of research that, if not directly, then definitely adjacent to the sort we expect to see in UFO reverse engineering or spacecraft propulsion design. So they founded the Institute for Exotic Science together. Again, I've also delved into that in a separate video, and there's some interesting points about that as well. In May 2020, during an interview with YouTuber Jeremy Reese, Eskridge made comments about why she founded the Institute, stating, "If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off," which is interesting. Late 2020, 2021, Eskridge reportedly stated that she had received threats and harassment due to her research plans, claiming she needed to disclose soon because the situation was escalating and becoming more aggressive. In early 2020, claims surfaced of intensifying harassment, including alleged directed energy weapon attacks and a near-miss incident with a bus that some observers described as deliberate. As we stated as well, 11th of June 2022, Amy Eskridge passed away at age 34 in a home in Huntsville. Now, for each incident or piece of evidence, I'll put forward a possible explanation for it where it is possible. So back to the bus incident. Now, I have to state this was reported from her to Sam Reed and Frank Milburn and others. Now, all the accounts for this are secondhand. There's no actual evidence in form of CCTV, police reports, or anything like that, or eyewitness testimony. So this whole incident is only based off her account of it, and then secondhand accounts from that. So I feel this is kind of beaten to be neglected. Also, to point out as well that it's some sort of deliberate unalival attempt with a bus. When you think about the logistics of it, it could have passengers on, it could or it have cameras on it. There'd be CCTV with the driver's face, numerous other factors, and a bus generally, it wouldn't be a good choice. Also, a quick related bio: Sam Reed, who was a close friend and business partner of Amy, and also prominent space industry CEO, Frank Milburn, is a former UK military intelligence officer of 22 years. Whom Amy hired as an investigator due to the harassment she was receiving and became a close confidant of hers as well. But there were numerous other reports by Amy of intimidation tactics, such as home invasions, repeatedly broken into, sifted through her belongings, but nothing missing. The directed energy weapons, think the Havana syndrome. There were sexual threats, street theatre, such as interaction with strangers who would reference intimate personal details or follow her in a manner designed to be noticed. A tactic often called gaslighting or gang stalking in harassment communities. So I listened to the I think it's Coast to Coast radio show that Frank Milburn was on, and he notes numerous things about the harassment that she received, such as car doors being unlocked after returning, going away and come back and they're unlocked, the battery being drained, ongoing vehicle tampering. There was groups of 2 to 6 strangers approaching her. They asked her detailed questions about her work, family, acted in coordinated roles, a good cop, bad cop dynamic, one insulting, another apologising. Even when she apparently went for a gynecological exam and some device that was used was then left in a car in a box or something along those lines. She became worried enough to carry a military nerve agent antidote auto injector after a reported incident where someone touched or patted her, and she later noticed a pinprick sensation. Again, though, I can't find any eyewitness witnesses to corroborate these claims. But I will say this, though, that these types of tactics would only really work in isolation without being witnessed by anyone else. The aim is mind games, and if you have someone else who witnessed such a thing, then it removes the queen from the mind game chessboard, as it were. That's the whole part of the atmosphere of it, to reinforce and add an extra element, is that there wouldn't be witnesses, so that is isolated in her own mind. So these were followed by further intimidation sort of tactics and methods, where when her car tires were slashed, and according to the claim, one of the tires was later appeared on Amy's yard as well. All these events were claimed to be framed as part of a broader effort to extend pressure and intimidation beyond Amy and a wider network. Now again, there's no evidence for any of these, no second witnesses that can corroborate these. Further to this, Milburn claims that the alleged harassment extended beyond Amy herself to people around her. He describes incidents involving her boyfriend, who was allegedly drugged while out of town and later had no memory of events, while Amy received messages suggesting he had spoken negatively about her. He also recounts claims involving friends and colleagues, including reports of kidnapping, drugging, and one individual suffering a head injury that required a long recovery and left them visibly shaken. In another case, a separate family was allegedly poisoned through takeout food that was labelled with Amy's name. Now again, I have to state there's no first-hand evidence of these. There is no recorded account of a boyfriend or any other party confirming these claims. There's no police report, no medical evidence to support these either. And this is strange if true, because it's almost like if anyone was targeting her like this, they're almost removing that hypothetical queen themselves. So it's kind of that's very strange. It steps outside of her in that isolation to people around her, and yet there's still zero named people that's given any testimony or on the record statement about these events, given that this was supposed to exist outside of a bubble now with these intimidation tactics. In addition to these, Milburn describes ongoing surveillance and intimidation claims, that Amy was regularly followed and that a vehicle was reportedly interfered with. The most extreme allegations, again, involve what he describes as directed energy weapon attacks, where Amy was supposedly physically affected from some form of energy-based technology, with claims that there are photos or videos of these incidents and that another scientist may have witnessed one. Again though, I can't find one named scientist who claims this or who can corroborate this at all. Milburn presents his latest actions as part of a deliberate attempt to debilitate her and interfere with her work. According to his interpretation, the overall goal of this alleged harassment was twofold: to pressure Amy into abandoning her research and to mentally destabilise or incapacitate her, potentially to the point of driving her to self-unalival. Also, something to note, which is including the podcast, is all the texts and emails Amy sent to Frank and Samuel. But again, the claims she makes in these aren't corroborated. It's even if there was one named person that can reliably state that they were with her or they as an eyewitness to such intimidation tactics, we could take these a bit more into consideration. But I feel we can only consider the fact she made such statements and have to somewhat negate much of the content that consisted within them and just go with the general theme, but not the details within it, sort of thing. Now, about the directed energy weapon attack, I've got a video here. I'll put it on the full screen. And apologies to the podcast listeners. There is some audio, but you can't grasp it. But here we go.
Again? Wait, okay, so this is the brain right here. This is the neck going down the spine. You can even see vertebra, vertebra, vertebra.
That's something special.
It's like an x-ray of my fucking posture when I sit in front of the computer.
It's like, it doesn't make sense to me that if it was a microwave.
About the directed energy weapon, if you step back and look at this through a basic physics lens, this claim starts to fall down very quickly. A so-called directed energy weapon, if it's realistic, would almost likely operate in the microwave or radio frequency range. But those waves don't behave like perfectly tight beams. Their power density drops with distance, and the beam spreads because of the finite size of the emitter. That means that the further away you are, the weaker and less precise the effect becomes. So the idea of a highly targeted attack from outside through a window already runs into serious physical limits. Then you bring the glass into this, and so in the video she claims that it's almost a bit like an X-ray. There's a projection onto the glass of a spine, and I'm assuming that she says the brain as well with the cranium. But this is where it really breaks down. Glass is not a recording medium. It doesn't store information about radiation that passes through it. It simply responds to energy. So at most, you'd expect heating, expansion, stress, maybe cracks. What you would not get is a detailed imprint of anything, let alone something like a human spine. An image in itself is a completely different process. To see the internal anatomy, you need X-rays, which rely on a differential absorption in the body, and you need a proper detector behind the subject to capture that information, like a phosphor plate. A window is not a detector. There's no mechanism here for forming or storing an anatomical image or information in general, especially on glass. Now, consider the claim that the radiation passed through the body first, which you would have to do to pass through and go through. So also the idea that this window, the beam would have came from another window opposite, because in the I believe in the radio, the Coast to Coast show that Milburn was on, he said, I think it might have been him or it might have been another reference, it could be on the texts or emails, he said that the beam came through the windows at her. So if it's projected on that, it must have come through another window and projected onto that one. It just would never, even in basic X-ray, like in front of the radiation, it doesn't work that way. So now consider the claim that the radiation passed through the body first. That makes things even worse. Human tissue is rich in water, and the microwaves are strongly absorbed by it. So the energy is converted into heat, scattered, and any fine structure is lost. By the time anything emerges on the other side, it's weak, it's diffuse, and carries no meaningful spatial information. And the image has to be behind the subject, as I said. It literally can't be in front of the subject. And here's the key point. A directed energy system transfers energy, not high resolution information. To produce something like an anatomical imprint, you would need a full imaging system, controlled geometry, the right wavelength, a dedicated recording medium. None of that exists in this scenario. Now add in the claim that this was powered by about 5 car batteries, as I believe it was reported. I think that was on the Coast to Coast radio show that I listened to. So, but if we're generous and we say from roughly 25 feet away, what's that, about 7.6 meters or something like that, so pretty close, within spitting distance. If we're generous and we say about 25 meters away, as it was stated that the source of this was from outside the apartment, and assuming it's on the ground floor, you might get a few kilowatts of microwave output, about that, from 5 car batteries, I think. But once which is not a small amount, it's a pretty decent amount. But once you account for beam spread, window losses, absorption by the body, the delivered energy drops significantly. You might get some broad heating, but not a precise structured effect. And finally, the real limitation is diffraction. Microwaves have centimeter scale wavelengths, which means you can't focus them into a tight, precise beam from a compact source to get a narrow beam. You would need a very large emitter. So a small hidden device producing a highly targeted effect at that distance doesn't align with how wave physics works. So when you put it all together, beam spreading, material response, imaging physics, tissue absorption, the claim just didn't seem likely. It directly contradicts well-established physics. And don't forget, this was apparently from a vehicle outside as well, so the emitter would have to fit inside that vehicle. It's worth asking as well why microwaves are being discussed in the first place, and why something like this couldn't rely on something like X-rays or gamma radiation. So when you look at the physics of that, it makes the claim even more plausible that it has to, and especially along the lines of microwaves, because gamma rays and X-rays require large, heavily shielded systems or radioactive sources. It's not something you power with a few car batteries in a vehicle. They would also cause obvious biological damage, not subtle or selective effects like you see in the Havana syndrome and stuff like that. And even then, imaging still wouldn't work, because you still need a detector behind the subject to capture the radiation. A window cannot do that. So in this case, microwaves are usually assumed for this kind of weaponry because they explain the claims well from going to the Havana syndrome sort of thing. And even then, the physics doesn't really stack up on that. So ultimately, this basic physics understanding makes me question the idea that she had any sort of anti-gravity research as well. Previously she stated she had to release it soon in 2021, and it was a good bit after this that the ultimate incident happened. Further to this, this isn't how things operate. They wouldn't just terminate people with knowledge like that, and this is an issue I have with other cases as well. So intellect in these specific areas is a very high value currency, and terminating someone with such knowledge is not a go-to response, let alone any research that she's done. If the government deem it of a national security importance, they would just confiscate it off her. It's as easy as that. They would confiscate it under the Invention of Secrecy Act 1951. And this is a whole other project I'm working on, looking at these secrecy acts and timelines and things like that, which I find it kind of pieces together quite strangely. And it's still related to the UAP topic as well. And also you've got the Defence Production Act of 1950, which is lesser, but it's more likely to be the 1951 Invention of Secrecy Act. They would just confiscate your research, and if you try and publish it afterwards, you'd just be criminally prosecuted. You'd be imprisoned under breach of national security laws, probably in segregation for safety reasons, and stuff like that, and investigations. Or if you're a serious risk, like, it'd be like long-term isolation, essentially, You see the government and thus the contractors don't need to silence academics by unalivals based on potential research. There are plenty of other legal ways they can ultimately do this. They would just rather confiscate your research, and highly likely, in fact, offer you the opportunity to work on it further behind closed doors. So this I don't really think aligns with how things would probably operate. So onto the biological effects. So the skin, the claim of the radiation dermatitis. This doesn't look like radiation dermatitis. Radiation dermatitis is quite well documented due to radiotherapy and such things like that. And I'll show a comparison picture. Also with the hands, the redness is symmetrical, surface level, and slightly more intense around the knuckles and joints. There's no blistering, ulcerations, or deep tissue damage. So radiation from an external source will almost always be asymmetrical due to the distance drop off, different parts exposed at different levels. It would also be directional as well. A van outside window would not produce identical bilateral exposure like this. Also, if the radiation was enough to do this, there would likely be many other symptoms: blistering, swelling, peeling skin, nails would likely fall off or deform and shed. I think these, from the pictures, they look perhaps more like some sort of, it could be a latex allergy from wearing gloves or something, in all honesty. It looks very similar to that. Or just like a normal skin dermatitis. Also another thing to note is that this was around the time of COVID, and some of this stuff was documented with COVID as certain side effects. I'll touch on that in a bit later as well. Also of note in the pictures was the case of the spinal fluid retention. So what is spinal fluid retention? Well, it's fluid collecting around the inside of the spinal canal surrounding the spinal cord. It wouldn't collect externally in a visible way. It also wouldn't collect in the soft tissue of skin. Also, if there was cerebral spinal fluid leakage, it's a medical emergency with severe neurosymptoms. You wouldn't just be taking pictures like that. So in this photo, what looks like swelling, it could just be a shadow. It could just be a normal anatomy under bizarre lighting, and it's just come up like that. Spinal fluid again can't sit under the skin in this way. I mean, if it was some spinal fluid or perhaps a herniated disc problem or something like that that's visible through the skin, it wouldn't be a minor issue. It would be catastrophic structural body failure. It's likely it's just, in all honesty, I think it's probably likely it's a normal back under weird lighting with the shadow. Now, she also has pictures of lesions and burns, and there are scratches, and I think these are scratches and bruises, essentially. The image on her feet could even be related to COVID again, same as some of the other symptoms, like on the hands. COVID-related skin findings are non-specific, and they can look very similar to common conditions like cold exposure, irritation, or mild inflammation. And again, don't forget, this was between 2020 and 2022, so kind of peak COVID. I would also note as well that there was a clear personality difference. And it's a bit touchy, this, but there was a personality difference in a comparison from a presentation video to a video that she made much later with Jeremy Reese and Mark Sokol. And again, going back to COVID with lockdowns and everything, some people struggle to cope with this quite dramatically. The mental health crisis dramatically worsened with lockdowns and everything. I have to say, I feel this is more a tragic spiral by someone. And I know from an associate how paranoia can spiral into such things as self-unalival. And it is a massive key factor. Paranoid delusion or psychosis are massive factors that can increase vulnerability in such instances. And even looking at such behaviour differences in those videos, there was lockdown around this time and people did struggle. And you've got to think, by general classification, the standard threat detection between paranoia and actual threat is generally met by eyewitness and independent, non-biased sources, which there aren't really any. There's none on the record, named on the record, that are independent, non-biased. I mean, the intimidation tactics, a lot could be down to kind of mental health crisis and a self-reinforcing spiral. The strangers that approached her could be innocent enough, and she just read the situation different because of the mental space. And again, I know how this can kind of play out through someone I know. The drain batteries drain. Yeah, the car door being left out open, absent-mindedness in that kind of headspace. Even things like the box with the medical tool, you've got to question, where is that tool? Where was the evidence at the time? Why wasn't it reported to police, documented then? Unfortunately, everyone is vulnerable to mental health conditions. None of us are unsusceptible to this. No matter your background, your financial status, your job. In fact, higher stress jobs, especially in academic areas, can sometimes make it more likely due to people being that perfectionist persona, the self-criticism, that kind of thing. So in conclusion to this, despite even the complications I faced looking into this, because I had constant websites not working when previously they have, and it was only entering information related to this case. All my devices were slowing down, like my phones, my computer, everything was just slowing down generally. But that's not a surprise. The cases have been given the cases I've been looking into, and my longer term case of mapping UFO sightings in geographic correlation with the US military and research bases and nuclear sites, I'm 100% not surprised that my devices are slow. Likely I am on some sort of watch list or being monitored, but that's just the agencies doing their job correctly and exercising caution, which I totally get. That's fine. Ultimately, these are my opinions, though, and I'm not rigid in them. I'm open to changing my mind with new evidence, but I also won't just agree with the consensus for ease. It'd be easy to lean into speculation here, but I think it's more useful to focus on what the evidence actually supports with the facts as they currently are. This may change, and perhaps these facts are presented this way through careful and excellent execution of something more sinister, and that's a plausible explanation as well. I think we all need to put a neutral kind of analysis hat on and see the data that's presented to us. And also remember that just because something's deemed as low plausibility, it doesn't mean it's impossible. And it just means it's a bit more unlikely. And just because something is, if it's deemed highly plausible, it doesn't make it definite. It just means it's more likely. So this is the presentation given by Amy Eskridge on Thursday, the 6th of December 2018. The lecture was hosted by the Huntsville, Alabama L5 Society, or HAL5, a local space society. A historical perspective on anti-gravity technology. Amy Eskridge, President of the Institute for Exotic Science, CEO of Holocron LLC. The Institute, Exotic Science, Exotic Results. A public benefit corporation specializing in quantum computing, gravity modification, metamaterial science, and communications. Huntsville based with international co-founders and collaborators. instituteforexoticscience.com. The team: Amy Eskridge, President; Chantal Butler, R&D Director; Nate Close, Creative Director; Sam Reed, Government Affairs Director; Richard Eskridge, Professor Emeritus; Paul Handy, Senior EE. Holocron Engineering, Huntsville-based father and daughter company with expertise in gravity modification research and development. The Amy Eskridge, CEO and co-founder, chemist and entrepreneur. Richard Eskridge, CTO, co-founder, retired NASA engineer and scientist. Gravity and anti-gravity. Definitions. Gravity: a fundamental physical force that is responsible for interactions which occur because of mass between particles, between aggregations of matter, such as stars and planets, and between particles, such as photons, and aggregations of matter that is 10 to 39 times the strength of the strong force, and that extends over infinite distances but is dominant over the macroscopic distances, especially between aggregations of matter. Anti-gravity: reducing, cancelling, or protecting against the effect of gravity. Gravity, the basics. Copernicus published theory of heliocentricity in 1543. Johann Kepler first described the laws of planetary motion in the early 1600s. Newton published the first universal law of gravitation in 1686, F equals G m1 m2 over r squared. Gravity follows an inverse squared relationship with force and distance. F grav is tilde 1 over d squared. First measurement of gravitational force by Henry Cavendish in 1790s. Einstein published general theory of relativity in 1916. What does relativity have to say? Gravity: a force or deformation in space-time. Anti-gravity: impossible according to general relativity without negative mass. Relativity and Newtonian gravity agree negative mass generating a repulsive force. Standard model of particle physics does not include negative mass. Unified field theory. Four forces: gravity (brackets graviton question mark), electromagnetism (brackets photon), strong (brackets gluon), and weak nuclear forces (brackets W and Z bosons). Latter three are unified. Gravity remains unexplained. Graviton, postulated to be the required to unify in 1934 by Soviet physicists Dmitry Blokhinstev and F. Galperin. Gravity, is it quantized? Question mark. Anti-gravity, research the early days. Brown's gravitator, 1920s. Thomas Townsend Brown's Byfield-Brown effect coined the term electrogravitics. High voltages, W over asymmetric high dielectric fields, asymmetric capacitance. Vacuum tests supposedly rule out ion wind. In 1960, patent unsubstantiated. Nikola Tesla's space drive, 1928, and there's an image of Nikola Tesla's space drive that his concept, which is kind of similar to the typical saucer UFO. Nikola Tesla's space drive, 1928. Patent 1655144, a space drive or anti-electromagnetic propulsion system. Electropulsation, dynamic theory of gravity. Matter is made up of whirls of each other. Rejects notion of curved space-time. Gravity Research Foundation, Founded by Roger W. Babson in 1948. Annual prize won by Stephen Hawking and 5 later Nobel Prize winners. Critical commentary. Before anyone can have the audacity to formulate even the most rudimentary plan of attack on the problem of harnessing the force of gravitation, he must understand the nature of his adversary. I take it as most axiomatic that the phenomena of gravitation is poorly understood even by the best of minds, and the last word on it is very far indeed from having been spoken. That's Bryce DeWitt, Gravity Research Foundation essay in 1953. Government and contractor programs. Aeronautical Research Laboratory supposedly conducted research at Wright-Patterson Air Force 1956. Research Institute for Advanced Study conducted research that became Lockheed Skunk Works in later years. The Searle generator in 1946. Claimed combination of anti-gravity and free energy device. Widely planned, still in development. The Dean drive, 1950s to 1960s. Reactionless drive, claimed to produce propulsion without propellant exhaust. Linear oscillating mechanism, effect may be due to friction and would not work in free space. The Wallace machine, 1968. Spinning brass discs, half-integer nuclear spin, aligns the nuclear spin. Patent cite kinematic field as mechanism of action. It's unsubstantiated. Lathwaite gyroscopes, 1974. Eric Lathwaite invented maglev. The hypothesis: rotating spinning disk creates a force orthogonal to both spin and direction. Claims that mechanical kinetic forces can cause weight change. Newton's second law explains this effect. Q of E equals H dot sub P plus R dot sub P cross P. Anti-gravity research, modern efforts. Mansfield Amendment, 1973. Restricted research by the DoD for non-military applications. Included anti-gravity research. This means most modern anti-gravity research has been outsourced to the private sector, brackets and or black budgets. Hutchison effect, 1970s. Anomalous effects noted while attempting to recreate Tesla experiments. Claims of Philadelphia experiment reproductions. Loss of ability. Woodward effect / Mach effect, 1990. Proposed by Jim Woodward as a reactionless thruster. Theorized to enable a warp drive via a large negative mass warp in spacetime. Large negative mass in small point theorized to create stable traversable wormholes. Alcubierre drive is also known as. Ning Li and Doug Tor, AC gravity, 1990s. UAH scientist who theorized a magnetic field applied to a superconductor will align ion spins to produce gravitomagnetic and gravitoelectric effect. 1999 Popular Mechanics article. UAH and NASA MSFC collaboration in 1996. Left UAH and founded AC Gravity LLC in 1999. With a $500,000 DoD contract in 2001. Then there's a screenshot. What happened to Ning Li? And I must note that this screenshot is taken from r/conspiracy, which says it's the Reddit conspiracy page. And it states what happened to Dr. Ning Li, ? Invented superconductor-based anti-gravity, joined DARPA, disappeared, ? And it says TL (dr). She goes from physics professor and researcher at Alabama, then starts her own company to develop her technological breakthrough. Then she signs a contract with DARPA, then no trace after that. Her short wiki provides a brief introduction, and the first post in this thread follows her known activity from 1998 until the trail runs cold. Anyone here have any idea what may have happened or what the latest is on this technology? Podkoletnov effect, 1990s to 2000s. Rotating YBCO superconductor produces gravity shielding. A 2001 patent. Collaboration with NASA MSFC in early 2000s. Claimed 2% reduction in weight. Widely planned by community. However, some near replications have been done, POHA in brackets. Tor Josivagos Timidata, 2001. Gravity beam generator, work at the University of South Carolina. Creation of an inhomogeneous electric field with two asymmetric hollow concentric electrodes. Experimental quantum gravity website still online. Tor's present work unclear. Lee, Tor, Podkletnov, and Modancy Panning. Ningley, Popular Mechanics article no longer available. Dr. University of South Carolina research never made public. Podkletnov ousted by University of Tampere in 1997. Giovanni Modani's Wikipedia page deleted. Claude Poher, 2000s to present. Modification of Podkletnov effect. Propelling force claimed to result from discharge of YBCO disk. Universon's theory, tested at NASA MSFC in 2015. Morningstar Applied Physics, 2000 to present. Paul Murad and John Brandenburg modified cell machine with gravito-electric magnetism, GEM theory, claims 7% weight reduction. Bowen Phantom Works in 2010s. Gravity Research for Advanced Propulsion, GRASP, program, admitted to in 2014. Podkletnov is a collaborator. TR3B, Black Triangle, Alien Reproduction Vehicle, is the result, ? Mechanism resembles Brown generator, ? Recent declassifications. Declassification of AATIP documents, Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program in December 2017. And it lists some of the two of these documents: Defense Intelligence Reference Document, Traversable Wormholes, Stargates, and Negative Energy is one. Defense Intelligence Reference Document, Warp Drive, Dark Energy, and the Manipulation of Extra Dimensions is the other. The future. What's the next step? ? Conclusion. What now? ? We need theories with testable hypotheses. Independently funded research by private interests is required. Promising results always disappear into the classified realm of how do we fix this. And then the final page is thank you. And that was the presentation by Amy Eskridge. As you know, this presentation was given, I think, more as an open forum, so that would kind of explain the lack in the mathematical equations and everything. And there were some really interesting points she puts in here. The timeline of events in researching anti-gravity technology from Nikola Tesla's space drive in 1928 through to even like the Dean drives of the 60s, the Wallace machine of 68. I think that's something that, frankly, I would probably look into in the future, because I think it points, there's quite an interesting mix of timelines there, and where is this research and timeline sort of event taken us to from there. And it's something I would probably research in the future, just following this timeline of events, even just to see where things probably should lie as opposed to where they actually do lie. And I suppose that goes to the concept of the black projects and the more secretive projects that, you know, these are probably highly likely are working on this kind of technology in the background, which again kind of reinforces the idea. And I did say at the end of the video, like, what I think happened, but it's not a given. You know, there's a lot of nuance to this story. There's a lot of layers to it, and I suppose the truth is, like, we don't know. You know, we don't know what happened. She clearly was looking into something. The institute was established for this, and, you know, her father was a NASA engineer, so clearly he knew his stuff. It's just tricky to say. Thanks again for listening. The next episode I do will be on the 2021 UFO sighting over Syria, and that was actually on the Weaponized podcast with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, and they released the footage and analysed it. And there's a lot of information. This has been analysed several times, this footage of a UFO, by military intelligence officials as well, which is why I think it deserves a little bit of interest. And I found it quite interesting analysing it as well. So hopefully I'll catch you next time, and take care for now.